This is Boston Lanka News, bringing you news, views and entertainment from Boston and USA. I'm Vayoni Dime. Experienced in both non-profit and corporate environments in the USA, with a background and experience in program management, Anjelika Silva was recently invited to the White House program Champions of Change, related to immigration reform and assistance to new immigrants. Currently retired and working to provide knowledge services as required by organizations in the USA, she has been actively involved in many voluntary services and was the president of the Sri Lankan Association of Washington, D.C. few years back. She worked for the recent congressional elections for the bipartisan Congressman John Delaney, Maryland 6th District, and arranged a round table for Sri Lankans to meet personally with him. Anjelika, today Sri Lanka has a new government and there are lots of promises about good governance. As a Sri Lankan American, share a few things that Sri Lanka can implement towards good governance.
Actually, my take on this, and I'm also echoing some of the sentiments from others, they should dwell less on the past and get on with what they have planned for their program. But at the same time, they're focusing on a 100-day target, and they shouldn't be rushing things, because there are some good decisions that they have made, but there are some that have been very hastily put forward. So what I would suggest is that their focus should be more on making the right decisions and not so much pushing for the 100-day achievement to say we have done this and that and a whole list of items. So that is what I would expect of them.
What would you think a new Sri Lankan government can do to improve its foreign services?
Oh, many things. The foreign service actually doesn't attract enough strong candidates to fill all the positions they have. That's what we have seen. So it's okay for them to appoint people from outside of the foreign service, but I think they should focus very clearly on making sure that some of the appointees fit the places that they send them to, because some assignments are really very heavy and some are not. And it's very important that one of the most important needs in the foreign service is to have good communicators. And it may not sit well with some people when I say this, but the nationalist thinking, of course, does not put much emphasis on English. But I think because it's a universal language, I think most people should get a thorough training in how to communicate. Especially in the United States, it's a lot of the discussions and whatever decisions are made and negotiated, because there's a lot of negotiation going on. And if you don't have a command of the language and you're not articulate, I think it can be a terrible drawback for our country. And the other thing is that I have always advocated that, with the foreign service, people come for a very short time. And they're always on a learning curve. You don't get a chance to actually assimilate into some of these communities and get a grasp of the culture in each country. So I have discussed this with many ambassadors and said, why don't you all have a council of strong expats who can be like the institutional memory, because every time a new batch comes, they are on a learning curve and then they have to start from square one. So you can eliminate that learning curve and then get off to a flying start up with some council who have experience and who have done things so that they don't reinvent the wheel. And those are some of the things that they should look at. And also they should try to attract some people who have lived in the countries that need representation. We find that some people who had been appointed, they may look like political appointees, but if they had lived in particularly the United States, there is a lot to learn, because you can't, even if you say you know English, it's not enough. I'm saying this because I have written a publication for foreign-born people who come here to live and work in the scientific arena, and there's a lot you have to understand in communicating and how to get things across. So because of that, the people who are appointed should really be excellent communicators in addition to the knowledge and experience and qualifications. But above all of that, they have to have a passion for the country they represent. And that is the most important thing.
Do you have any suggestions to improve the relations between Sri Lanka and USA?
Yes, of course. In addition to the political aspect, because that's not easy to build relationships with countries, and it's not only the diplomats or the highly placed representatives from the government that can come here and make an impression about our country. I say this because there are many avenues through which normal individuals like you and me can portray an image of our country. We can be cultural ambassadors and really make inroads into winning people's hearts here to facilitate the diplomatic and the political part of it. I say this because there are very many avenues for us. One of the things is President Obama brought this initiative in 2009 November to declare May every year as an Asian Heritage Month, and there are celebrations. I myself have with putting a program together at the Smithsonian. The perspective was not to showcase ourselves, but to actually relate to coming here and what we brought and what we had to learn to adjust to this country. And I have served on panel discussions where, our culture and how we raise our children, because we always get questions, how do you manage to raise your kids to, focus on their studies and, make something of them. So, cultural exchange, then, even our arts and crafts, and also finding some kind of a bond with them, because you learn a couple of their songs and sing with them, they've won your heart, So things like that, we have to do a little bit more, because people tend to think that coming to America, I can speak for America and maybe a little bit for England because I've lived there. But they focus mostly on the part that is, success for themselves. It's a land of opportunity. It's the land of, prosperity and consumerism. There's a lot beyond that, actually. There is a lot beyond that. There are lots of commonalities that we should be looking for and making contact and talking to them with the same language, and educating them on our culture and what we bring here. That helps as well.
Just to follow up, how can we improve communication between Sri Lankans in USA and with political leaders in Sri Lanka?
Yes, actually, I think, when you touched on that other question about the improving relations between Sri Lanka and the US, the Sri Lanka-US relations were really at a low, and we have to build up a lot. And I think each one of us has to take responsibility to act as an ambassador in our own right and give the right information to people and not run down our country. No country is perfect, no leadership is perfect, and neither are we perfect. But it is wrong to, highlight the negative side. So what I would suggest to the government is, there's a limitation to what the embassies can do, but they need to establish, not in every country, in some of the very critical countries like the US, the UK, maybe Canada, and some of those places where it is really important to have some kind of a public relations secretariat. It can be it doesn't have to be a brick and mortar office, because you can, with technology today, you can communicate like we are communicating. You can have meetings on technology based programs and brainstorm I do a little bit of that by trying to educate the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate and the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House with positive information about Sri Lanka, because I think they are really poorly informed. They've got a stilted view of Sri Lanka, and I think that led to a lot of problems because we didn't have a solid public relations arm working together. Anything that the embassy said was dismissed as government propaganda. We have to have an independent body. It could be affiliated to the government because we need to have the resources of the government. We don't have access to data. We don't have access to some of the history of whatever has gone on and things like that. And there are people who are very capable of writing. I work with a few, and we collaborate on our own as individuals, but we have had absolutely no support from the leadership in Sri Lanka. And they have really wasted, because we do ad hoc work. 5 or 6 people getting together and doing something is less effective than if it is an organized network.
Sri Lankan expatriates have lots of experience and expertise to offer for Sri Lanka. Do you think Sri Lanka has taken steps to utilize this resource?
Actually, my answer is a vehement no. They have not used the expatriates as a resource to the fullest capacity. I say this because, we have had I've lived here 30 years, and over those years, we have had many people in the government coming and talking to us and, learning that we have a wealth of experience to bring back and saying, come back and serve the country. But when you go to do that, you run into a lot of problems because we don't have a one-stop shop where if we are wanted in our country, where they make sure that we have the right visas, we get the right opportunities. I'm saying this because I had to turn down an offer because I didn't have dual citizenship, and there was a moratorium on dual citizenship. And there's such a wealth of experience that we can give back to the country. And apart from that, the country spends so much foreign exchange educating people overseas. Now, the job market has dried up to some extent in these countries. It's not as easy as it used to be able to get a B visa and then convert it into something else and get absorbed. So what they should do really is target the people who come for certain courses of study, give them some insight into what's required in Sri Lanka so that they choose those fields of study and bring it back to the country. It's not always that we have people studying things that are needed in our country and then we lose them. And the enormous amounts of foreign exchange that is spent to educate them. So that's another thing that they should look into. And the people who make decisions in Sri Lanka, when they come out to these countries, they should make it a point to talk to the expatriates. I could quite honestly say I can speak to my congressman much easier than I get to be able to have a conversation with any of our leaders who come here. So they need to tap into, there's so much that can be learned from information exchange. Then they get ideas. They seem to be making decisions in a vacuum, and the expatriates are certainly underutilized.
You have done a lot of work with Sri Lankans living in Washington, D.C. To raise funds for charitable causes in Sri Lanka. Tell us why many Sri Lankans tend to do more for Sri Lankans when they are out of Sri Lanka.
I think, there's a spectrum across that. There are some who are very passionate about Sri Lanka. They're very, very supportive of Sri Lanka. And only thing is, if someone takes the initiative, then they participate. I have been involved in many, many, many projects. But one thing I was very careful of was I paid very close attention to the fact that when you try to do something for Sri Lanka, there's an element of suspicion. That suspicion really puts the person who has well-intended ideas in a difficult position, because fundraising is not fun because you put your reputation on the line. So whatever programs I have done, like I did a program for limbs for the soldiers, bunk beds for soldiers, sponsoring children who are in orphanages, adopted by a family, to help them to do extra things. Then I've done the tsunami project. I've numerous things, but it's the crux of it is that you have to organize these projects in a way that they are foolproof. They have to be done in a way that nobody can turn around and say you took money and put it in your pocket. So if A receives help from B, what I used to do was connect A to B, and I was just the facilitator. I didn't take anything in the middle. So that way there was trust, and there was established integrity, which was very important. I don't blame people for being distrustful, because I have myself experienced situations where I've seen a lot of inappropriate things being done. But, there's a whole spectrum. There are people who take the initiative, then there are the people who will follow if something is being done by somebody they can trust. Then you get another group that's completely disconnected. They just don't want to do anything. They think, we have nothing to do with Sri Lanka, we don't care anymore, and things like we are not going back, kind of thing. So you get a whole spectrum of people across the board. And I have been a past president of the Sri Lanka Association of Washington, DC, which is actually a 501c3 tax exempt organization, and people can donate direct to their source through the organization and then claim taxes on it. But that again is underutilized. I think people just haven't got used to trusting some of these organizations, and you have to really push very hard and convince them beyond doubt that it's going to the right sources.
You have been involved with a White House program called Champions of Change related to immigration reform in USA. Could you please share that program and your involvement?
Yes, it's a very beautiful program. I was floored when I was called by the White House and asked to attend this program, because and I couldn't figure out how. Valerie Jarrett, who works very closely with them, the President Obama, is the one who was behind this program. And when I got a call from one of her assistants, I asked them, how did you find me? It was because of the work I had done with foreign-born chemists. And, that was paid work. I mean, I got paid for doing that. That was my job. I wrote a publication called the Employment Guide for Foreign-Born Chemists that helped them to navigate the immigration system. Short of giving them legal advice, they knew what questions to ask with from a lawyer. And also I wrote about cultural differences and how to navigate the workplace and go about a job search, write an interview, how to face an interview, and what the employer expects. And on the flip side, I used to also do workshops for recruiters in some of the big chemical companies like Abbott Labs and Glaxo and Merck, and places where some of the recruiting managers didn't know the cultural differences. So it was like hand-holding. So I think that's the reason why I was included in coming to this program. And I met some wonderful, wonderful people. There was one woman that struck me very much because she was of Kurdish origin, and her recognition as a champion for change. I have not been awarded anything because I have not started a chapter in the Sri Lankan community, but the Kurdish community benefited from this woman who had started a program where new immigrants coming to this country were guided through the systems and the processes. There's a lot you have to learn. In fact, President Obama very clearly said the Champions for Change has made a difference to people who come to this country, because it's not only the legal papers, you have to know how to navigate this system. This is a very complicated country, as you know, you've lived here, right? You have to know how to start life, how to go about job search, how to go about building credit, how to plan for your retirement. And there's a lot of information that needs to be given to people who need the guidance. And most of these champions for change were people who had used that kind of service for their communities, and they were recognized by the White House. It really motivated me because we do it in our Sri Lankan community to some extent, but people come and ask me to write a resume or get guidance on benefits packages and things like that because they know me. And it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be about who you know. It should be a structured program that we have in our community to be able to, go to some person and say, hey, I have an issue. I don't know where to begin. Even if that person doesn't know, we should have a panel of champions who help our new people, and especially because Sri Lanka is one of the beneficiaries of the diversity lottery. We are considered an underrepresented minority in the United States. So, but we don't. Many people fall into trouble by getting advice from people advising about. So I was inspired by that program because of how much it can do to help people get off a learning curve and take the right path in their, after all, they come here as the land of opportunity. So they should be guided to, get those opportunities and benefit from it. But unfortunately, we don't have a structured thing in our community. And I have all the information on how to start one if somebody comes up. And I hope somebody sees this interview and gets in touch with me because it's a great program.
That concludes our news edition. We meet you again with another news edition of News, Views and Entertainment from Boston and USA. Till then, goodbye.